What if I told you that one of the most iconic names in hip-hop could be at the center of the biggest scandal the federal prison system has ever seen? A scandal so shocking, it could change everything we know about medical privacy, the justice system, and the lengths people will go to keep secrets. Sean "Diddy" Combs, a man who once ruled the music industry, might just be the catalyst for the largest cover-up ever exposed. But what happened behind the walls of MDC Los Angeles in July 2025 is something no one saw coming, especially not the way it all leaked to the public. Stick with me as we unravel the truth behind Diddy's medical condition, the scandal that followed, and the conspiracy no one is ready to admit. It's a story that starts with a secret, but ends with questions that the federal system can't hide any longer.
Section 1. The Shocking Revelation. It all began on the morning of July 3, 2025, when an internal memo from the medical department at MDC Los Angeles was leaked. And when I say leaked, I mean this wasn't just any ordinary slip-up. This document contains something so disturbing, it shook the entire federal justice system to its core. Inmate Sean "Diddy" Combs, better known as one of the biggest names in music, tested positive for 2 high-risk sexually transmitted infections, herpes simplex virus type 2, HSV2, and chlamydia. Now, at first glance, that might sound like just a personal medical issue, but when you realize where this information came from, one of the most high-profile facilities in the country, it starts to raise some serious questions. This leak wasn't just about a celebrity inmate getting sick. The situation inside MDC started to spiral out of control. The report was marked as urgent, an emergency alert. The consequences? Potential widespread transmission. And what followed were lockdowns, medical alerts, and a scramble to contain a virus that no one expected to be spreading behind prison walls. Within hours, several inmates were moved into isolation, all potentially exposed to the same infection. Yet the bigger question looms: why was this information kept under wraps for so long? Was it just a coincidence, or was something much darker being concealed here? The story doesn't end with just a test result. No, that was only the beginning of a dangerous game that the federal system didn't want anyone to know about.
Section 2. Uncovering the cover-up. The leak of Diddy's medical report wasn't just a mistake, it was the first crack in a carefully constructed wall of silence. And the more we dig into the events that followed, the more we realize that this was no accident. This was a deliberate effort to cover something up, and the deeper the investigation goes, the darker it gets. The report containing Diddy's positive test results was found in an unusual place. A crumpled piece of paper tucked away in the nurse's station, marked with a hastily scribbled note reading, "Urgent internal meeting needed. Risk of spread." There was no signature, no official stamp, just a piece of paper that was quickly hidden from view. The most disturbing part? The cameras in the area were down, and a critical blind spot in the surveillance system allowed someone to slip through without a trace. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a cover-up in the making. As staff began to realize the gravity of the situation, the chain of events escalated quickly. Internal alerts went out, but not fast enough. The emergency measures that should have been taken were delayed, and it was clear that the urgency of the matter was being downplayed. By the time the medical team began cross-checking Diddy's movements and interactions, it was almost too late. The infection had likely spread, and the system was scrambling to contain it. And that's where it gets even more suspicious. Not only was the medical response slow, but there were also signs that someone was deliberately suppressing information. Key medical documents were hidden, notes were altered, and access to Diddy's records was restricted under bizarre administrative directives. The question was clear: who had the power to stop this from being handled properly? The more we look at this, the more it seems like a deliberate attempt to control not just the medical narrative, but the public's perception of what was really happening inside MDC. And it's not just the prison staff involved. This cover-up went much deeper than anyone could have imagined.
Section 3. The medical response and fallout. As the dust settled from the leaked document, the real nightmare began inside MDC. Which should have been a straightforward medical response turned into a chaotic series of missteps and cover-ups. With the leak now out in the open, the medical team scrambled to contain the potential outbreak. But the more they dug into Diddy's records, the more unsettling things became. Diddy's medical history was a mess of red flags. His symptoms, painful rashes, difficulty urinating, and fever had been ignored for days, despite the clear signs of infection. Nurse Caitlin M. had already recommended isolating Diddy early on, but her warnings were shot down by higher-ups, who dismissed her concerns. Her assessment was overruled, leaving Diddy exposed to other inmates and putting the entire unit at risk. And yet, her voice was silenced. Why? There was more to this than just a slow medical response. Someone was actively preventing action. When Diddy's file was reviewed, it became clear that it had been tampered with. Entries were missing, medical recommendations were altered, and Diddy's tests weren't logged correctly. In fact, the test results that were finally leaked had been added to his records in an unconventional, unauthorized way. Someone was deliberately keeping this information from being processed properly. But it wasn't just about keeping Diddy's condition under wraps. The entire medical system at MDC was being manipulated. Unauthorized access to Diddy's file was rampant, 19 separate times in just a matter of days, including 6 late-night access attempts from a mysterious employee who had already resigned months earlier. This wasn't just an isolated case. This was a deliberate effort to keep critical information hidden, and it reached far beyond just the medical team. The reality of what was unfolding inside MDC was clear. This wasn't just a failure of the prison's medical system, this was a systematic cover-up. And the more the leak spread, the more it became clear that the truth about what was happening at MDC wasn't going to stay hidden for much longer.
Section 4. Inside the isolation ward. When Diddy was transferred to the isolation ward at MDC on the morning of July 2nd, it marked a turning point. The facility's most secure unit, B2, wasn't just meant for high-risk inmates. It was now becoming a quarantine zone for a potential outbreak that no one wanted to acknowledge. Diddy, along with other inmates who had come into contact with him, was moved under strict medical supervision. But this wasn't just a routine transfer. It was the beginning of a full-blown crisis. Inside the ward, Diddy's condition worsened. The surveillance footage showed him entering his cell, subdued and almost resigned, his hands cuffed in front of him as he shuffled into the space. But it wasn't just his physical state that was concerning. The air inside B2 grew thick with tension as other inmates, including some who had been in contact with Diddy, started showing similar symptoms: rashes, fever, and pain while urinating. The disease was spreading, but no one was talking about it. Diddy himself was visibly distressed, though he never spoke much during his time in isolation. When a doctor tried to examine him, his response was almost robotic. He raised his hand and muttered one simple word: "Hurry." He wasn't angry or defiant, just defeated, like someone who had lost hope in the system that had failed him. And then came the eerie silence. The prison staff began wearing protective gear, but it wasn't enough to calm the growing fear among the inmates. MDC's medical staff tried to isolate the problem, but the rumors began spreading faster than they could act. Diddy's isolation wasn't just a health measure, it was a warning to everyone who had crossed paths with him. The outbreak wasn't just in the medical unit anymore. It was in the air, in the shared spaces, in every inmate who had been exposed. This wasn't just about Diddy anymore. The entire facility was becoming a ticking bomb.
Section 5. Leaks, whistleblowers, and the fight for transparency. As the internal chaos at MDC deepened, something unexpected happened. The truth began to slip through the cracks. What was supposed to stay locked behind the walls of the prison was now leaking out into the world.
Documents, photos, and testimonies began surfacing anonymously, and with each leak, the situation at MDC grew more sinister. The first whistleblower was nurse Caitlin M., who had tried to raise the alarm from the very start. When she saw the neglect in Diddy's case, she acted. She wrote detailed reports, made clear recommendations to isolate him, and warned that the infection was likely to spread if proper protocols weren't followed. But her reports were ignored, overruled by higher-ups who seemed determined to silence the issue. But Caitlin wasn't about to give up. After her recommendations were blocked, she gathered evidence, photos, documents, and confidential reports that painted a grim picture of what was really happening inside MDC. She knew what was at stake and didn't want to be complicit in letting a public health crisis spiral out of control. It was Caitlin's actions that set everything in motion. On the afternoon of July 3rd, she sent an anonymous email to a human rights organization attaching 3 critical images: the positive test results, a medical timeline detailing Diddy's appointments, and a handwritten note that read, "The medical unit knew since 6/26. No one dares to sign the report." The email went viral. Within hours, the leaked files were circulating through prison rights forums, and the truth began to spread like wildfire. The leaked files contained critical evidence of a cover-up, a medical system that had failed to act despite clear warnings, an inmate whose health had been neglected even when there was clear evidence of risk, and the federal prison system was scrambling to contain the damage. The question on everyone's mind was, why was this being hidden? How many more people had been exposed to the virus? And why was Diddy being treated differently than other inmates? As more details emerged, the answer was becoming clearer. The system wasn't just hiding Diddy's medical records, they were hiding the truth of what was really happening inside the prison walls. And as public pressure mounted, more whistleblowers began to step forward. Stories from staff members, former prisoners, and even concerned citizens flooded social media, painting a portrait of a system that had prioritized protecting its own interests over the safety of its inmates. But even as the pressure grew, MDC's leadership remained silent, and the cover-up continued. What started as a medical issue quickly became a battle for transparency, and it was clear that MDC's internal systems were no longer in control.
Section 6. The Global Exposure and Media Frenzy. As the leaked documents made their way into the hands of investigative journalists, the story exploded into the public eye. What had started as a rumor within the halls of MDC quickly became an international sensation. The combination of high-profile celebrity drama and a potential health crisis inside the federal prison system was too explosive to ignore. Social media platforms lit up. The hashtag #DiddyInfected trended across Twitter, now X, as millions of people shared and speculated on what was really happening inside MDC. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was Diddy the first of many to be infected? Were other high-profile inmates involved? Could the federal prison system be concealing a massive outbreak? The questions kept coming, but answers were few and far between. Amid the media frenzy, official statements from MDC were scarce. The prison's communications team repeatedly declined to comment on the medical condition of any inmate, citing privacy laws, but silence only fed the fire. As the leaks continued to surface, anonymous messages, photos, and videos, the media scrambled to piece together the truth. One viral video titled Ward B2, 72 Hours with No Laws, garnered over 8 million views within just 36 hours. It featured leaked surveillance footage, first-hand accounts from former prison staff, and detailed maps of the medical unit, all showing how the situation had escalated into a full-blown crisis. Viewers were left stunned, asking, how much was the system hiding? Pressure was building from every angle. Legal experts weighed in, warning of potential lawsuits against the federal government for its mishandling of medical care.
Human rights groups raised alarms about the dangerous conditions within the prison, calling for immediate investigations into the prison's practices. And even politicians began to take notice, with Congresswoman Marcy Denham urging the House Judiciary Committee to open a hearing to address the federal prison system's handling of contagious diseases. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, the federal response remained cautious. MDC continued to deny responsibility, and the leaks were quickly scrubbed from official channels. But the damage was done. What had started as a medical incident inside a federal prison was now a media storm that could not be contained. As more and more details emerged from whistleblowers, it became increasingly clear that the story was far from over. The exposure of the outbreak wasn't just a failure of the medical system, it was a massive breakdown in the way the federal prison system operated, with its focus on secrecy and control at the expense of human health. The world was watching, and as the scandal unfolded, one question remained. Could the system continue to hide the truth, or was the dam about to burst?
In conclusion, the big question. As the dust begins to settle, one undeniable truth stands out. This is not just a story about a celebrity inmate or a medical crisis. This is a story about the fragile system that's supposed to protect us, but instead it has exposed its deepest flaws. Diddy's case, whatever the truth may be, ignited a firestorm of questions. Questions about the integrity of our federal prisons, the treatment of inmates, and the lengths people will go to in order to hide the truth. And as the story continues to unfold, we can't help but wonder, how many other stories like this have been buried, silenced by the very system that's supposed to be accountable to the public? If an entire federal prison can't manage a medical emergency like this without covering it up, what else are they hiding? How many other lives have been affected, and how many more stories are out there waiting to be uncovered? As the investigation deepens, one thing is certain. This scandal is far from over. The leaks, the cover-ups, the whistleblowers, they've only just begun to unravel a system that's been built on secrecy, neglect, and the very worst kind of exploitation. And now, the world is watching. What happens next? Will the system finally be forced to answer for what's been done? Or will the silence continue and the truth remain locked away? The story of Diddy and the MVC outbreak may seem like a tale of corruption and failure, but in the end, it raises a much bigger question. Who decides who is worth protecting? And who gets to write the narrative of justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates on this ongoing investigation.